The courtroom was quiet, eerily quiet. Only the shuffle of papers broke the stillness. Sarah sat on one side of the room, her posture steady but her heart pounding. Across from her, Chen lounged in his seat like it was his victory lap. His suit charcoal gray and custom-fitted, barely creased as he leaned back, a smug smile tugging at his lips. The divorce papers had already been signed. Marcus had done it with flair, clicking his pen theatrically and tossing the signed pages across the table like he was sealing a business deal, not ending a marriage. He looked at Sarah like she was some naive charity project he had outgrown. "Should have known better," he had whispered when he signed, loud enough for her to hear. But he didn't know everything, not yet. Not until the judge opened the sealed envelope from her late father's will. The one Marcus never thought mattered. The one that would undo everything he believed he had secured. 3 years ago, Sarah had been someone else entirely. Hopeful, soft-spoken, in love. She had met Marcus at a charity gala, of all places. He was dazzling then, a successful investment banker with a reputation for charm and deep pockets. She was working as a high school English teacher, still grieving her father's recent passing, and barely making ends meet. Marcus had noticed her across the room, offered a glass of wine, and leaned into conversation like she was the only person that existed. Grand gestures came quickly. Roses sent to school, impromptu getaways, dinners that cost more than her monthly rent. Within 6 months, he proposed with a ring that sparkled brighter than her future. "You deserve to be taken care of," he had whispered. Sarah believed him. Why wouldn't she? At first, the comments were subtle, sweet even. "It's adorable how passionate you are about teaching," Marcus would say, tousling her hair like she was a child with a hobby. When she mentioned wanting to pursue a master's degree to become a principal, he chuckled. "Why stress yourself? I make enough for both of us." She thought he meant well. Protective, maybe a little old-fashioned. But once they were married, the comments sharpened. During dinner parties with his colleagues, he'd say, "Sarah? Oh, she's just a teacher. Keeps busy while I handle the real work." Each just chipped at her confidence. And when she tried to join conversations about the world or finances, Marcus would wave her off with, "Sweetheart, let the adults talk." His friends would laugh. Sarah would smile tightly and excuse herself to the kitchen. Every time it stung deeper. The way Marcus spoke about her father hurt the most. Her dad, Robert Mitchell, had passed away from cancer when she was 25. He had been a maintenance supervisor. Not wealthy but wise, kind, and devoted to her. Sarah kept a photo of him on her desk at school, always remembering his quiet sacrifices. But Marcus, he saw none of that. "Not everyone can be successful, Sarah. Some people are just blue-collar," he'd say with a shrug. When she cried on her father's birthday, Marcus rolled his eyes. "You've got to move on. Clinging to the past won't change your background." Sarah never forgot what her father taught her, that a person's worth isn't in their bank account, but in their character. Still, Marcus tried to erase that part of her, like it was a stain. By the 2nd year of marriage, Marcus had started staying out late. Client dinners, he claimed. His phone buzzed constantly, and he always stepped into another room to take the calls. Sarah stopped asking. She didn't want to become that wife, the one who pried and begged. So she poured herself into teaching. Her students gave her something Marcus never could: purpose. One student, Maria, had been on the verge of failing due to a tough home life. Sarah spent hours tutoring her after school. When Maria got a full scholarship to college, she hugged Sarah tightly and said, "You changed my life." That moment reminded Sarah who she really was. Beneath the criticism, the dismissals, the smallness Marcus made her feel. But back at home, Sarah was fading. Marcus made her believe she should be grateful. Grateful that he had seen potential in someone so ordinary. She began to believe it too. Until one phone call changed everything. It happened on a Tuesday evening in March. Sarah had just returned home from a parent-teacher conference. She was beaming. She had helped a student's family create a new learning plan, and it was a rare moment of genuine success. She walked through the front door, eager to share the good news. Marcus was in his study, laughing loudly on the phone. As she approached, her footsteps slowed. Something about his tone didn't sit right. She heard him say, "Trust me, David, she has no idea. She's so naive it's almost cute. She thinks I married her for love." The air left Sarah's lungs. She froze, barely breathing. Marcus chuckled. "Of course I have a prenup. You think I'm stupid. When we divorce, she'll get nothing. I'll walk away with the house, the accounts, everything. Even that land her dad left her. She doesn't even know what she signed." Sarah's world tilted. Her skin turned cold. She stepped back slowly, afraid that the floor might give way under her. In that moment, everything came into focus. The long nights at work, the sudden interest in having her sign legal documents, the random bouts of affection just when she started asking too many questions. He'd been planning it. From the beginning. "She's been so easy to control," Marcus was saying. "A few gifts, a couple of trips, and she handed over everything. She still thinks I love her." He laughed again. "I should get an award for this. 3 years pretending to love someone so boring and plain. But it'll be worth it when I cash out." Sarah didn't wait to hear more. She turned and walked silently to the bedroom, numb from head to toe. That night, she lay in bed beside him while he slept like a man with no conscience. She stared at the ceiling, blinking back tears that refused to fall. The man she loved, the man she thought had rescued her from loneliness and grief, was a predator in a suit. By morning, Sarah had made up her mind. Marcus kissed her forehead before leaving for work, saying, "Have a good day at school, sweetheart." His voice was warm, familiar, fake. Sarah stayed home, calling in sick for the first time in years. She needed answers. She opened the file cabinet, pulled out every document she could find. Mortgage paperwork, bank statements, legal forms she had signed without reading closely. As she combed through them, her heart broke all over again. Every line confirmed it. She had signed away her rights. The house wasn't hers. Their savings weren't protected. Even her father's land had been used as collateral, at Marcus's suggestion. She sat at the dining table surrounded by paperwork, her fingers shaking. How could she have been so blind? Marcus had positioned everything so cleverly. Routine paperwork, he had called it. Just legal formalities, he had smiled. But now she saw the trap for what it was. And still, he had the nerve to come home a week later with a bouquet of flowers and a bottle of wine. "Sarah," he said, settling beside her on the couch like they were still a team. "We need to talk." Her stomach turned. She stared at him in silence. "I've been thinking," he continued smoothly. "I think we both know this marriage isn't working." Sarah blinked. He looked so calm, so calculated. "You want a divorce?" she asked. He nodded, squeezing her hands like he was offering a gift. "Let's make this painless. I'll take care of the paperwork. You'll be fine." She didn't speak. She couldn't. Marcus set a manila folder on the coffee table and opened it with a practiced motion. "Everything's in here. Just sign where indicated. You'll get enough to rent a nice apartment. Maybe go back to school. I'm trying to be generous, Sarah." She flipped through the pages. It was worse than she expected. The settlement offered her barely anything. No share of the house. No savings. No mention of the land. "What about my father's land?" she asked. Marcus's face flickered. "Sarah, we've been through this. The land was used for the mortgage. The bank owns it now. Besides, it's not worth much." He was lying. So easily. So confidently. And if she hadn't overheard that call, she might have believed him. She looked him in the eye and said calmly, "I need time to think." Marcus smiled as if he'd already won. "Of course, sweetheart. But let's not drag this out. The sooner we file, the better for both of us." That night Sarah didn't sleep. She sat at the kitchen table with the divorce papers spread in front of her. Every clause favored Marcus. He'd get the house, both cars, the investment accounts, everything. Her. She'd get just enough to survive. Worse, the document claimed the land from her father would be sold off to cover marital debt, with all proceeds going to Marcus in compensation for his financial contributions. The words blurred before her eyes. She was about to lose the last piece of her father, the land he had once said would protect her someday. And Marcus had known it, planned for it, played her like a fool. But no more. The next morning, Sarah took a personal day and drove across town to a law office recommended by a colleague. The sign on the door read Margaret Willis, family law attorney. Margaret was in her 50s, with silver-streaked hair pulled into a low bun and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She listened patiently as Sarah laid out everything. Her marriage, the documents, the phone call. When Sarah finished, Margaret leaned back and folded her hands. "Sarah," she said gently, "I need to be honest with you. You've signed away a lot. His lawyers did their homework. So I'm just supposed to lose everything?" Sarah asked, her voice tight with panic. Margaret shook her head. "Not necessarily. But we need to be smart." Margaret opened a legal pad and clicked her pen. "Tell me more about this land. The one your father left you." Sarah sighed. "It's just a few acres outside of town. There's nothing on it but an old barn. My dad never did anything with it." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "Have you ever had it appraised?" Sarah frowned. "No. Marcus said it wasn't worth much. That's why he used it for the mortgage." Margaret smiled faintly. "I think it's time we found out for ourselves. And I want to dig into your father's finances. People leave behind more than they realize." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked. "You'd be surprised how many people inherit assets they don't know about. Let me do some digging." Sarah left the office that day torn between hope and doubt. Her father had worked hard all his life, but he'd never seemed like a man with secret wealth. Still, she trusted Margaret's instincts. 2 weeks later, her phone rang while she was grading papers. "Sarah," Margaret said, "you need to sit down for this." "Why? What did you find?" "That land you inherited. It sits on top of a natural gas deposit. According to the county surveyor, it's potentially worth over $12 million. Sarah gasped. "What?" "It gets better. I found records of a trust account your father set up in your name before he passed. It's been dormant, likely because the bank couldn't find you. Your married name threw them off." Sarah stared at her phone in disbelief. "A trust account?" Sarah whispered. "Yes," Margaret confirmed. "Your father invested in a mix of long-term stocks and savings bonds. He wasn't flashy, but he was smart. With compound interest, the account is now worth over $2 million. Sarah dropped into a chair, stunned. "This can't be real. My dad worked maintenance. He barely made enough to cover bills. He made small, consistent investments over decades." "It added up," Margaret said. "And here's the best part. The trust is legally separate from marital assets. Marcus can't touch a cent of it." Sarah laughed through her tears. "He thought he was so clever." "Let him keep thinking that," Margaret said. "We'll use it at the right moment." By the time the divorce proceedings began, Sarah was ready. Marcus arrived at the first hearing wearing a tailored suit and his usual smug expression. His legal team looked expensive, cold, confident, calculating. He barely glanced at Sarah except to flash a look of polite pity. He probably thought she'd crumble the moment she walked in. Instead, she sat tall beside Margaret, her face unreadable. Marcus played the part of the generous husband. "Your Honor," his lawyer began, "my client is prepared to offer a fair settlement. Mrs. Chen contributed very little financially, but Mr. Chen wishes her no hardship." Sarah said nothing. Margaret had told her to wait. "Let them talk," she had whispered. "Let them dig their own grave." Marcus nodded solemnly through the hearing, acting every bit the noble spouse. "I've always wanted what's best for Sarah," he said smoothly. "I only wish her happiness and security moving forward." Sarah wanted to laugh. The man had once said she was boring enough to put him to sleep. But she kept her composure. The judge, Patricia Rise, was known for being no-nonsense. She listened closely, asked pointed questions, and didn't smile once. "We'll schedule a final hearing to review and approve the settlement," she said. Marcus nodded as if victory was already in hand. He had no idea the storm coming his way. The final hearing was set for a crisp Thursday morning in October. Marcus arrived with the same arrogant air he'd always carried. His lawyers followed, wheeling in briefcases. Sarah sat quietly beside Margaret, dressed simply but with calm confidence. Judge Rise began by reviewing the assets in question. "According to the filings," she said, "we are here to finalize the division of marital property, including the home, accounts, and inherited land used as mortgage collateral." Marcus's lawyer stood. "That is correct, Your Honor. Mr. Chen believes the land should be sold to cover debt, and any remainder divided." The judge turned to Sarah. "Mrs. Chen, do you contest this claim?" Sarah rose to her feet. "Yes, Your Honor," Sarah said clearly. "There are some facts about the land and my inheritance that haven't yet been presented." Margaret stood beside her. "Your Honor, with the court's permission, we would like to submit updated documentation regarding Mrs. Chen's inherited property and financial assets." Marcus frowned, confused. His lawyer leaned in, whispering rapidly. "Proceed," the judge said. Margaret handed over the documents. Robert Mitchell, Mrs. Chen's late father, left 2 assets, a parcel of land and a trust account. Geological surveys show the land contains natural gas deposits, and the appraised value is $12 million. A gasp echoed in the courtroom. Marcus went pale. Margaret continued, her voice steady. "In addition, Mr. Mitchell created a trust account which is legally separate from marital assets. It is currently valued at over $2 million. The judge raised her eyebrows. "Mr. Chen, were you aware of this?" Marcus sat frozen. His lawyer's hand gripped his arm. "Your Honor," Margaret added, "we have recordings and signed statements indicating that." "Mr. Chen, were you aware of this?" Marcus sat frozen. His lawyer's hand gripped his arm. "Your Honor," Margaret added, "we have recordings and signed statements indicating that Mr. Chen attempted to coerce his wife into signing over control of these assets, despite knowing their potential value." Judge Rise's expression turned cold. "Mr. Chen, this court takes allegations of fraudulent intent very seriously. Do you wish to respond?" Marcus stood slowly, his voice cracking. I didn't know. I never meant to." "That's enough," the judge said. The silence in the courtroom felt like a held breath. Marcus stood there, visibly shaken. His voice was no longer confident. It wavered. "There must be some mistake," he mumbled. "I wasn't aware of any trust. I thought the land was just undeveloped property." Judge Rise narrowed her eyes. "Yet you encouraged your wife to sign it over as collateral. Without due diligence. Without a proper appraisal." Marcus's lawyer quickly stepped in. "Your Honor, we request a delay in the ruling so we can verify the new information presented." The judge's gavel came down sharply. "No. We will settle this today. I've seen enough." Sarah kept her gaze locked on Marcus, unmoved by his sudden loss of composure. For once, he wasn't the man with all the answers. He looked small now. "Suppose." The judge turned to her. "Mrs. Chen, both the land and the trust account are clearly separate from marital assets. You will retain full ownership of both." Sarah nodded slowly. "Thank you, Your Honor." Judge Rise wasn't done. "Additionally, in light of the evidence suggesting Mr. Chen attempted to manipulate these assets through deceit, I am awarding you half of all jointly acquired marital assets. This includes the home, the investment accounts, and vehicles." Marcus's jaw dropped. "But what about the prenup?" Marcus blurted out, finally finding his voice again. "Your Honor, we had a signed agreement." Judge Rise adjusted her glasses and looked him square in the eyes. "Prenuptial agreements are void when there is evidence of fraud, coercion, or failure to disclose material financial facts. In this case, Mr. Chen failed to disclose his knowledge of the land's value and his intentions to benefit from it without his wife's informed consent. Therefore, the prenup is null and void. Marcus's shoulders slumped. His lawyers exchanged helpless glances. Sarah remained calm, though inside, her heart was racing with quiet triumph. Margaret leaned over and whispered, "You're doing great. It's almost over." Sarah nodded, her fingers tightening slightly on the edge of the table. Judge Rise looked down at her papers, then back up. "Furthermore, given the financial imbalance and the deception involved, I'm ordering Mr. Chen to pay all of Mrs. Chen's legal fees and court costs." Marcus looked like he might be sick. The courtroom murmured with quiet gasps and whispers. Sarah allowed herself to breathe. Really breathe, for the first time in months. She hadn't just protected her father's legacy. She had reclaimed her own dignity. After the gavel hit the bench for the final time, signaling the close of the hearing, the courtroom slowly emptied. Sarah stood, gathering her papers. Marcus didn't move. He sat staring blankly ahead, like a man whose carefully built world had just collapsed. Outside, the autumn wind blew gently through the courthouse steps. Sarah walked down with Margaret beside her, every step feeling lighter. But just as they reached the parking lot, a familiar voice called out, "Sarah! Wait!" He turned. Marcus was jogging toward her. His tie loosened, desperation written across his face. "Please. We need to talk." Sarah turned slowly to face him. She had waited years for this, waited to say what had lived unspoken in her heart. "Talk?" she asked, folding her arms. "About what, Marcus? About how you lied to me. How you tricked me into signing over everything I owned." He held out his hands like he was trying to catch something fragile. "It wasn't like that. I didn't mean for it to go that far. I made mistakes." She stared at him. "Mistakes? Or choices?" Marcus swallowed hard. "I was under pressure. I didn't know about the gas deposit. Swear. I was just trying to protect our future." "By stealing mine," she snapped. "Sarah, come on," he said. "You know I loved you. I still do. I got caught up in things, in business, in pressure from my family. I never meant to hurt you." She shook her head slowly. "You loved the idea of me. A quiet little wife who wouldn't challenge you. Who would sign whatever you put in front of her. You loved control, Marcus. Not me." He stepped closer. "We can fix this. We were good once. We can start over. Please." His voice cracked. "Don't let this end like this." Sarah's eyes filled with quiet fire. "It ended the moment I heard you laughing on that phone call. Everything after that was just paperwork." For a moment he looked like he might cry. But Sarah had no sympathy left to give. She had emptied her heart of him. "Goodbye, Marcus," she said softly but firmly. "This is the last time you'll ever have the chance to lie to me." She turned and walked away, not once looking back. Marcus stood there, watching her leave, realizing far too late that the woman he had once thought small was no longer in his shadow. She had stepped into her own light. And he couldn't follow. Weeks passed. The divorce was finalized. Sarah moved into a quiet apartment on the edge of town. Not because she had to, but because she wanted something simple, something hers. The trust account was transferred into her control. She didn't touch it, not yet. The land remained untouched too, though energy companies began calling regularly with offers. Margaret called one afternoon and said, "You know you're sitting on more than wealth. You're sitting on power." Sarah smiled. "I'm not ready to sell. Not until I decide what I want to build there." She returned to teaching, her students more curious than ever. "Miss Chen, are you rich now?" one of them whispered. She laughed. "I'm the same teacher you've always had. Now sit down and do your homework." But something had changed. She stood taller, spoke firmer, smiled more. And she never let anyone call her just a teacher again. The staff room buzzed with talk of her courtroom win, but Sarah didn't share details. She didn't need to prove anything anymore. Her father had given her a gift far greater than land or money. He had given her the foundation to rise, and rise she did. One rainy Saturday afternoon, Sarah visited the old land her father had left her, the same land Marcus once dismissed as worthless. It was quiet, peaceful. The grass had grown tall, and the old barn leaned slightly to one side, weathered by time but still standing. Sarah walked slowly through the field, her fingers brushing the tall blades as memories stirred. She could almost hear her father's voice beside her, telling her to be patient, to think long-term, to trust her instincts. She stood still and breathed it all in. This place, this quiet piece of earth, was hers. And now, she saw it not just as inheritance, but as a beginning. In the months that followed, Sarah met with financial advisors and energy consultants. The offers for mineral rights came quickly, some in the millions. But she didn't say yes to the first or the second. She listened, learned, and took notes. She asked questions they didn't expect from a teacher. One executive chuckled condescendingly during a meeting, saying, "You're surprisingly thorough for someone outside the industry." Sarah smiled politely and replied, "And you're surprisingly sloppy for someone inside it." That deal ended quickly. She wasn't going to be underestimated again. Meanwhile, Margaret remained a steady support. One afternoon over coffee she said, "You know, Sarah, I've represented a lot of women, but not many like you. Most come in broken and scared. But you walked out of that courtroom with more than a win. You walked out transformed." Sarah smiled. "I didn't feel strong most days. I was terrified." "That's the trick," Margaret said. "Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do it anyway." Sarah thought about that often, how courage had become her armor. Eventually, Sarah created a non-profit scholarship fund in her father's name, the Robert Mitchell Legacy Fund. It was aimed at supporting students from low-income backgrounds who wanted to pursue careers in education or technical trades. "My father didn't go to college," she told a local journalist, "but he believed in hard work and helping others. This is my way of carrying that forward." The article went viral in their city. Donations poured in. Former students sent messages. One wrote, "You helped me when no one else did. You made me believe I mattered. Thank you for not giving up on us, even when others gave up on you." Though the land was worth millions, Sarah lived modestly. She kept her used car. She still packed her own lunch for work. Luxury didn't appeal to her. What she craved now was stability, peace, and authenticity. She used part of the trust to pay off her modest debts and quietly invested the rest. Her days were filled with lessons, laughter, and the occasional quiet evening on her apartment balcony, sipping tea and reading books she never had time for during the chaos of her marriage. And she was finally sleeping through the night. One evening, a familiar number flashed on her phone. She stared at it for a long time before answering. "Hello," she said. It was Marcus. His voice was thin, stretched. "Sarah," he said. I just wanted to say I'm sorry." Silence. Then he added, "I didn't expect you to fight back. I didn't even realize how much I was hurting you until I lost you." Sarah didn't reply right away. She wasn't angry anymore. She was simply done. "Thank you for saying that," she said quietly. "I hope you learn from it." He sighed. "You're doing well, I hear." "I am," she said. "And I will keep doing well, with or without you." After that call, Sarah blocked his number. Not out of bitterness but for peace. There was no need to reopen doors that led to darkness. She had walked through fire and come out stronger. She no longer needed to prove anything to Marcus, or to anyone. One of her close friends, Lila, took her out for dinner a few weeks later. "To your freedom," Lila toasted, raising a glass. "And to your glow-up. You look good, girl." Sarah laughed. It's amazing what losing 180 pounds of emotional baggage can do. The table burst into laughter. For the first time, Sarah felt free enough to laugh too. Loudly, joyfully. At school, Sarah became a mentor to younger teachers, especially women going through tough relationships or transitions. She never shared all the details, but when asked how she stayed strong, she would simply say, "I remembered who I was." That made all the difference. Her strength became quiet but contagious. The students noticed too. They looked up to her not just as a teacher, but as someone who had lived and survived and still stood tall. She became known for one phrase she always told her students: "Don't let anyone write your story. Not unless they've earned the ink." On the anniversary of her father's passing, Sarah visited the land again, this time with blueprints in hand. She had hired a local architect to help design a small retreat center on the property. A place for teachers, students, and women in transition. A place of healing. The center would have classrooms, gardens, reading rooms, and a small library named after her dad. "He spent his whole life fixing things for others," she said softly. "Now I get to build something that fixes hearts." She placed a single daffodil on the barn door and whispered, "Thank you, Dad. You saved me, even after you were gone." By the time construction began, Sarah had turned down 10 different corporate offers for the land's mineral rights. She wasn't in it for fast money. She was building legacy. One energy executive tried to pressure her, saying, "You're throwing away a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity." She smiled and replied, "No, I'm living it." When the ground was finally broken, a group of students, teachers, and neighbors gathered with her. Maria, the student she once mentored, now a graduate student herself, hugged Sarah and said, "This land raised you. Now it's going to raise others." Sarah stood on that hill, the wind in her hair, and knew her story had only just begun. The retreat center took nearly a year to complete. During that time, Sarah balanced teaching full-time and overseeing the project's progress every weekend. She met with builders, landscapers, and volunteers who believed in her vision. The architect, a woman named Iphioma, became a close friend. "You're not just building a space," Iphioma told her once, walking the property with muddy boots. "You're building a message that women can rise, not just recover." Sarah smiled, brushing wind-blown hair from her face. "I don't want it to be about what happened to me. I want it to be about what's possible." The center opened on a bright spring morning. They named it Mitchell Haven. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was small but powerful. Teachers came from nearby schools. Former students showed up with flowers. Lila gave a speech that made everyone cry. "This place," she said, "is a monument to quiet strength, to rebuilding from rubble." Maria stood beside Sarah, now interning as a counselor. "Miss Sarah," she whispered, "this is the safest I've ever felt." Sarah squeezed her hand. "That's the goal." As the crowd clapped and the doors opened for the first time, Sarah looked up at the sky. She didn't cry. She smiled. Inside Mitchell Haven, the walls were painted in warm, earthy tones. Every room carried a name that honored resilience, courage, grace, truth, and fire. The main library had a mural of her father, painted from a photograph she kept for years. He stood smiling in his work overalls, one hand on his hip, the other holding a wrench. Beneath it, in bold script read, "A man's value isn't in what he earns, but in what he builds." Visitors stopped to stare. Some touched the image gently. "This is beautiful," they'd whisper. Sarah would nod, quietly proud. "He built me." Marcus, meanwhile, faded from her life like a distant shadow. Occasionally she'd hear through mutual acquaintances that his career had taken a hit. Rumors circulated, something about reckless investing, burned bridges. A few months after the divorce, he emailed her. No subject line, no greeting, just a single sentence. "I didn't realize you were the Empire." She didn't respond. She didn't need to. The closure had come not from his regret, but from her growth. She printed the email, folded it neatly, and tucked it into a drawer. Not out of nostalgia, but as a reminder of who she'd once been, and who she would never be again. On the center's first summer retreat, Sarah hosted 10 women going through various transitions: divorce, job loss, grief, identity shifts. They shared stories under lantern light, cooked meals together, and walked the trails behind the barn in silence or deep conversation. One night, as they gathered near a fire pit, one woman asked. Asked Sarah what helped you the most when everything fell apart. Sarah stared into the flames for a moment. Then she said, "The day I stopped trying to prove I was enough, and just decided I already was." The fire cracked softly. No one spoke for a long time. But they all understood. Later that evening, Sarah sat alone on the porch of the main building, watching fireflies blink across the fields. Ifeoma joined her, offering a mug of cocoa. "You know what I've noticed," she said. "You didn't rebuild your life out of spite. You built it out of love." Sarah nodded slowly. "I don't want revenge. I want peace." "And you have it," Ifeoma said, raising her mug. "To peace." They clinked mugs gently. Sarah whispered, "To peace." For once, it wasn't something she was chasing. It was already here. Months turned into a year. Sarah was invited to speak at conferences, women's panels, and school leadership events. But she never turned her story into a brand. She spoke from the heart. Never polished, never rehearsed. At one event, a young teacher approached her, tears in her eyes. "I was going to quit. I thought I had nothing left to give. Then I heard you. You reminded me why I started." Sarah hugged her tightly. "You're not alone. Just remember you're allowed to fall apart. What matters is that you get to choose how you come back together." Sarah started writing in the evenings. Just reflections at first. Then memories. Eventually, a book began to take shape. Not about Marcus or the courtroom victory, but about resilience, boundaries, and rediscovering herself. The working title was simple. After the Fire. Margaret read the first few chapters and said, "You've got something powerful here." Sarah laughed. "It's messy." "So is healing," Margaret replied. "Write it anyway." So she did. Not to sell. Not to prove anything. But because her story no longer belonged to shame. It belonged to light. When Mitchell Haven celebrated its one-year anniversary, Sarah stood at the front steps with a small group of returning guests and new faces. She read aloud from a letter she'd written to her younger self, the woman who once believed she was small, insignificant, replaceable. "You're not broken," she read. "You're just in the middle of the story. Keep walking." Tears slid down more than one face. Afterwards, a teenage girl approached her with trembling hands. "Can I show you something?" she asked. She pulled a crumpled paper from her bag. It was a poem titled Teacher of the Earth. It ended with, "You didn't just survive. You taught us how." That night, Sarah sat alone in the reading room, surrounded by soft lamplight and the scent of old books and lavender. She placed a hand over her heart and whispered to the silence, "I'm proud of you." Not to anyone else. Just to herself. For every time she stayed silent. For every time she spoke. For every moment she thought she'd never recover. And yet still did. Outside, the wind rustled the trees. Somewhere out there, a version of her was still learning to let go. But here now, in this place she built from ashes, she had arrived. Whole. Rooted. Free. Months later, Sarah received a letter from the probate office. It was a final closure on her father's estate. An administrative formality. But enclosed with the paperwork was something unexpected. A handwritten note her father had penned just before he died. It had never been delivered because they didn't have her new address at the time. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it. The paper was aged, but the writing was unmistakably his. "Sarah," it read, "you are stronger than you know. I'm not leaving you money. I'm leaving you foundation. Build something better. Love deeper. Stand taller. And never let anyone shrink your worth." Tears slid down Sarah's cheeks as she folded the note back up. It wasn't just a letter. It was a blessing. A quiet nudge from the man who had shaped her values. That night, she framed the letter and hung it beside the mural of him in the library at Mitchell Haven. Students, guests, and staff would often pause and read it. Some even copied it down in notebooks. "It feels like something a father would say to me," one visitor whispered. And in that moment, Sarah realized her father's words were no longer just hers. They belonged to everyone who needed them. Every weekend, Sarah hosted reflection sessions at the center. They weren't formal classes, just a circle, tea, and truth. People came from all walks of life. Some had lost homes, others had lost confidence. But in those gatherings, something sacred always happened. One afternoon, a woman who had been quietly weeping finally spoke. "I thought losing everything meant I had nothing left to give," she said. "But sitting here, I think maybe I'm not done yet." Sarah nodded gently. "You're not," she said. "You're just beginning again. And beginnings are sacred too." Despite the many offers, Sarah still hadn't sold the mineral rights. "One day," she would say when asked, "when the time feels right." People didn't understand it. But for her, it wasn't about the money. It was about intention. What she had built was never meant to be transactional. It was about restoration. Her wealth wasn't sitting under the soil. It was in every changed life, every returned smile, every hand held at the edge of despair. She had turned betrayal into bloom. And no amount of profit could compare to that. Sometimes, when the center was quiet, Sarah would walk the perimeter trail alone. Helped her think. Helped her remember. She often found herself stopping near the edge of the property, where wildflowers grew tall and untamed. She liked that spot best. There was a stone bench there now, carved with her father's name and the words, "Steady hands, strong heart." Visitors left notes tucked underneath it, letters, drawings, bits of folded hope. Sarah never read them. She didn't need to. She could feel what they meant. Healing didn't always need to be spoken to be real. Years passed. The story of Sarah Chen became something of local legend. People still talked about the courtroom twist, the land discovery, the fortune Marcus never got. But Sarah never fed that part. "That was just the surface," she would say when asked. "The real story is quieter. It's about waking up from a lie, and choosing not to hate the liar." She didn't erase her past. She honored it, used it. Every scar became scaffolding. Every loss a lesson. She didn't need revenge. She had roots. Eventually she did publish her book. It wasn't flashy or scandalous. It was honest. The dedication read, "To my father who gave me the ground beneath my feet. And to every woman who forgot she was a wildfire." It sold modestly, but it traveled far. Letters poured in, teachers, single mothers, survivors, women in quiet jobs living loud truths. "You helped me remember myself," they said. Sarah wrote back to every single one. Not because she had to, but because she knew what it felt like to feel invisible. And she believed in making people feel seen. On the 5th anniversary of Mitchell Haven, the community gathered under fairy lights and lanterns. There was laughter, music, poetry, dancing in bare feet. At the end of the night, Sarah stood before them, holding nothing but her father's letter in her hand. "I used to think my story ended when I lost everything," she said. "But loss wasn't the end, it was the clearing." He paused. "Everything that mattered grew after that. This place. This peace. You." The crowd stood, clapping, some crying. In the front row, Maria whispered to a new intern, "That's not just a teacher. That's a builder."